I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in the financial markets any more than you do. So my job is not to just blindly tell you what to do. It's your money. It's your retirement plan. It's your estate plan. So my job is to help educate you as to the risks and rewards, and then you make the decision.
Technology is one of the defensive elements is if you can make sense of it. When you can't make sense of it, you are a victim, or you are going to be a targeted victim.
The more sensitive and the more negative a situation is, the more imperative it is that you are truthful. Imperative it is that you are transparent. And if there is something about the situation that you honestly don't know, I don't know is an acceptable answer.
Your defensive time that you had in the military, tell us a little bit about that.
It's very much true in military operations, is that the enemy gets a vote. I went from business school to I was a member of the Ranger machine gun teams.
Deep in the digital shadows, where threats hide behind any random bite, a fearless crew of cybersecurity warriors guards the line between chaos and order. Their epic battles, rarely spoken of until today. Welcome to the Defender's Log, where we crack open the secrets of top security chiefs, CISOs, and architects who faced the abyss and won. Here's your host, David Redekop.
Welcome back to another episode of the Defender's Log. And I am very glad that Steven Elliott is able to join us today. He's our Chief Financial Officer at AdamNetworks, and I'm very privileged to have gotten to know you, Steven. Welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, likewise. It's great to be here.
When I first started the Defender's Log podcast, I thought, you know what? It's just going to be people in tech and cyber. And at some point, it became very obvious to me that there are so many analogs to the real world. And there's a reason why I thought you should be on here today. And that is because the real world is always going to matter, and matter more, I think, than the digital world. And there's a very strong defense analog, especially given your background. As our audience knows, I live and work in Canada, but Steven is in the United States. And we are true brothers in so many senses. And so that's why I wanted to just have our audience get to know you a little bit. Steven, tell us how you got your started on this planet.
Wow. Well, the short version, I was born Western Kansas, a small farming community called Hayes, Kansas. If any of you have ever driven through on Interstate 70, you've probably gotten gas there at some point. It's not known for too much else in the country, but it's great community, great little town. So all my family, for the most part, are in some form or fashion attached to agriculture, farming. There's a little bit of an oil industry there. So that was the world that I grew up in the 1980s. And then I went to college at Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma, studied international business. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, didn't really have a plan. I probably, if I didn't have to have a financial justification for my education, I probably would have been just a history or an English lit major, because those were the classes that I loved the most. But I didn't want to be a professor, and I didn't want to be a barista. So I don't know what the other, no offense, like to those disciplines, because they're very necessary in our world. But yeah, so I wasn't, I didn't have much of a plan, but I did. I enjoyed business. I enjoyed. There's a historical aspect to business. Understanding history, I think, is important to, seeing where it rhymes in our world. So that aspect was always very interesting to me. Just the decision-making piece of it. How can you understand numbers to make better decisions, and et cetera. So a lot of things about the business piece of it that really resonated with me, but I didn't really have much of a plan as far as what I was going to do with that. And then my junior year of college was 9/11, and that altered my trajectory, as it did for a lot of people, quite a bit. I had family who had served in previous conflicts, to include World War II, And so I made the decision essentially to say, I don't know what I'm going to do as a career, but it felt like between where I was at in college and any other career, I really needed to spend some time in the military. So I did that 3 weeks after I graduated with my bachelor's. I was at sunny Fort Benning, Georgia, and began a 4-year enlistment in the Army. And then having concluded that in 2007, I started as a financial advisor with, at that time, what was Citi Smith Barney. And little did I know that I was entering that industry about 12 to 18 months before a complete and near total financial collapse of the financial sector. So that was interesting time to enter that world. And then I spent about from '07 to about 2022, spent that time in private wealth management. And then the latter part of that, I was running a trust company. So we were administrating trusts and estates, which is kind of a second cousin, I guess, to a more traditional financial planning, wealth management relationship. So fascinating work. There's elements of relationship, which is so critical. All of those documents, any legal document, really, whether it's an operating agreement or whether it's a trust or a will, it's really only as good as the relationships that drafted it and signed it. And so you kind of get a seat at the table in a lot of those conversations where you see how those documents and agreements work well because the relationships work well. And then you also see where they don't because of the relational discord. So that was my journey prior to intersection with AdamNetworks, which was not at all on my bingo card, so to speak. And I think it was probably, I need to look back and get the firm date, but I want to say it was probably 2017, 2018 was when I first met Francois Dreesen at an event in Seattle where it had nothing to do with cybersecurity. He was presenting new film that he was working on at that time, because I think he had started doing some work with Adam, but still had his studio. And we just started talking and struck up a friendship. And then he started telling me about this thing called AdamNetworks and this guy he met called David. And that was the beginning of my my foray into the industry. So that's a lot. That's a lot of ground to cover, but that's kind of the overview as far as what's brought me here.
I'm forever grateful for that event that Francois went to find you, to meet you, and for that connection that, in hindsight, is so obvious for us anyway. I mean, we are mutual benefactors of getting to connect with our own kind, where the worldview is aligned in spite of a completely different background, different politics, different education, different area of specialty. But there's something that drew me to you immediately, and I suspect it would be the same for Francois. Like, you have this very quick ability to take a otherwise complex idea and instantaneously synthesize it and make it a very palatable, easy to understand concept by any audience member. And I'll give you a very specific example. I remember the first time we talked about company valuation, and you said it's very simple. It's the present value of all future revenue or future profit, or however, you may have used one or two more words. I'm like, yes, of course. And I, of course, spent years in the present value and future value calculation to do fancy mortality tables to calculate, what an annuity or a life insurance policy should cost or reward, depending on which end of that transaction you're in. And of course, it's the present value of all future transactional value that makes the, and ever since then, you've done that on a repeated basis. So I'm very grateful for that, because as complex as technology is, one of the defensive elements is if you can make sense of it. When you can't make sense of it, you are a victim, or you are going to be a targeted victim. And so, what I always appreciate about you is that your lack of wasted time on technical engineering is what gave you the advantage in actually understanding the macro.
Yeah, I think that's probably true to some degree. I think I also had a lot of practice, which it's always interesting to think about too. Like making the switch from financial services to AdamNetworks was easy in some respects because of just the relationship and the trust and respect that I have for you and Francois and the rest of the team. Really, it was just like, well, these are extraordinary people, and if my skill sets can serve this team, and that means that I get to spend time with these people on a daily basis, well, that's a really good thing. And if they happen to be selling cybersecurity software, fine, but that's not really the point. It's just more that there's something of value that we can provide to the marketplace, and these are good people to do it with. And so sometimes you look back, or sometimes when you're kind of in the midst of life and you wonder, like, is there a trajectory here, or am I just bouncing over here and doing this thing, and then I'm bouncing over here and doing that thing? And that saying that life is lived forward but understood backwards. I think that's very true. Where you start to look back and you can kind of see some threads. And one of the threads for what we were talking about was I'll never forget one of the more senior advisors at the branch that I was at when I started in the industry. She was a wonderful. We weren't partnered officially, but she was just a really good mentor to younger advisors like myself. And she gave me a book called Story Selling, uh, and it was particularly geared towards financial services industry, because not unlike cybersecurity or technology, you want to talk about a black box lexicon that most people who are making the buying decision, quote unquote, the retiree, whomever, they don't know the difference between a SEP IRA or a simple IRA or a call option or what. All of this is just as confusing. It's a different lexicon, but it's the same black box, which to some degree is necessary because it is a complex world. You do need to know the terms, and you do need to, have competence in that. But in another degree, sometimes I wonder, I'm not saying there's a conspiracy, but sometimes I wonder, it's just like, are we making this more confusing on purpose? Because sometimes it feels like we are. And so I was forced to, early in my career, I had people who were helping me think that way. People who were helping me like really think in terms of, this is your audience. It's a retiree from the state of Washington. They don't know 5% of what you know about financial services, but that doesn't mean they're dumb. And so if you treat them with respect, and if you work to try and find the language that they can speak, then you're actually going to empower them to make decisions, which turned out to be a good business prospect. And it was also kind of a somewhat of a way of qualifying even clients, because sometimes you'd have people come to you and they weren't interested in a conversation. They weren't interested in learning. They were just interested in, I'm going to give you money and you're going to go make me money, and money, I'm going to fire you. It's just like, well, here's the thing. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow in the financial markets any more than you do. I just don't know. So my job is not to just blindly tell you what to do. It's your money. It's your retirement plan. It's your estate plan. So my job is to help educate you as to the risks and rewards, and then you make a decision. And that was really what my practice was built around, that. And it was, it was great. But I had a lot of really good help, and I think that started me early on, and it set me up well for the transition into cyber. It is thinking that way. The challenge is that then entering this industry, which I basically entered about 7 years ago on a part-time basis with Adam, and then full-time for 4 years now. I was the person who didn't know anything. So in order for me to level set and be able to I understand a P&L and a balance sheet, that's fine. But I've had to really drink from a fire hose to just be, from a business standpoint, conversant, not trying to know what you and our engineers know, that's not necessary. But it really has been a challenge, and you guys have been really good teachers. So that helps a lot. Is to have people who can kind of help guide you through it, and then gave me a lot more appreciation for the times when I was a young advisor. I was stuck in, finance speak, and I just kind of shake my head, and that's just like, you didn't have to say all that. Like, they told me what you're talking about anyway. So yeah, I've definitely learned a lot, and I continue to learn a lot. And so thank you guys for teachers.
No, I mean, I remember the first time that you were interviewed on the Cube, and I thought, well, what's he gonna say? And then afterwards, just like, whoa, we don't need any engineers to ever show up on camera again. We're just gonna send Steven everywhere. So, you clearly were a good student, and Francois is a very good teacher on the communication side. So that's partly what gives the three of us some resilience in that none of us have the exact strengths. There's some overlaps, of course, and that's what you really want in a leadership team that really is has as an important a mission as we do. Um, I want to switch gears for just a little bit, Stephen, to the military experience that you have and the defensive role in there. And before we go into that, from the perspective of Canada and other countries, I do feel that this is an opportunity to share that most Canadians, I believe, would understand that we do owe a good chunk of our freedom and our liberties by the fact that we ourselves as a country have experienced a good solid defense because of who our neighbors are. You know, being part of the world's longest undefended border, and with most Canadians living within 100 miles of that border, and having the relative peace that we've had for so long, is because of the US military. There is a picture that enters my mind is the fact that military power has been there, and even though it could be used even more than it has been, it is because of that that we are as safe as we are. And so for that, I am personally grateful. Coming from a Mennonite background, in the last number of centuries, our antecedents felt that we wouldn't participate in war. In fact, it was very often the reason our antecedents left for another country in order to avoid being drafted, because the notion of killing another human being or somehow assisting was contrary to what our antecedents believed. All that to say, thank you for what America and folks in the military have done in the US and in Canada too, to give us and our children the freedom and the liberty to live out lives that we feel that we must do, but we don't have to go to bed being afraid. And so I just had to say it. But let's now switch to your defensive time that you had in the military. Tell us a little bit about that, what that experience was like.
Yeah, so I went in enlisted. I had a college degree. I could have gone on as an officer, but the fastest pathway in the United States Army to get into a special operations unit was the enlisted pathway. If I went in as an officer, it was going to be a lot more time in the schoolhouse. I wasn't sure if I wanted to make the military a career. And I also at the time, that's quaint to think about, is I didn't know how long the war was going to last. And so, previously deployments for, the United States, hadn't, the last war, quote unquote, that the United States had fought, that was an actual, not a low level conflict, was, the first Gulf War. And that was more or less over in, 60 days. So I was in a hurry to find my way, into the fight, so to speak. And so I joined with a Ranger contract and completed all of the selection and everything to serve in the 75th Ranger Regiment. Specifically, I served at Second Ranger Battalion. That's up at Fort Lewis, Washington. And so, yeah, I went from business school to I was a member of the Ranger machine gun teams. And the way the Ranger Regiment is organized, it's organized the same way as essentially any light airborne infantry unit in the U.S. military is. So it's a similar organizational structure. And regardless of whether you're in a special operations unit or not, there's certain military principles that always apply, and you can't project offensively if you do not have secure perimeter. So in Army or Ranger speak, one of a word picture, if you want to talk about that, if you have a platoon of folks walking around in the woods, and you stop and you're gonna sleep, etc. The first thing you're gonna do is you're gonna form what's called a patrol base, and that's gonna be a triangle. It's a perimeter. Machine guns are on every corner. You're gonna make sure you have overlapping fields of fire. You're gonna make sure that you've got proper distance between the perimeter, and then you revert to your priorities of work. And that's always, like, that's one of the most fundamental things in the Army anyway, is your priorities of work, which are always, it's basically the things that you have to do that nobody should tell you to have to do, right? It's almost like a part of your general orders. And that is always first and foremost, it's security, period. Establish security. Even if it's just you and one other guy, the first thing you do is somebody is on security. And then it's weapons maintenance, right? If you can't fight, if your weapons don't work, that's a problem. Then it's take care of yourself. And then at the very bottom of the list is sleep. And so those are your priorities of work that you're sort of always, you're always tied into. But yeah, it definitely crystallizes in a very visceral way the balance between doing something that is inherently risky. If you're doing a raid or if you're going out on patrol, you are taking risk. And it is less risk to stay inside the wire than it is to go outside and try and knock down somebody's door. But how do you reduce exposure? How do you operate as smartly and as safely as possible so that taking that risk, you reduce as many variables as possible? Because I think that's the other thing that this is true in life, but it's certainly true in business. It's very much true in military operations, is that the enemy gets a vote, meaning the process you go through to plan for an operation, the value in that isn't so much you have a perfect, tailor-made, flawless plan. That plan is going to be subverted in some way, shape, or form. You're going to get there, and what you thought was on target isn't on target, or an airplane's going to break, or something's going to happen. And so if that, quote, something is going to happen is just baked into the expectation, then the planning value is primarily about the process. It's primarily about the fact that, okay, I know things are probably going to go sideways in a way that I don't even know they're going to go. Nobody does. But we've gone through this process together collectively. I generally know where people are. I generally know what's supposed to happen. I certainly know what the objective is. So that makes you more equipped. Knowing those pieces of information of the plan actually equips you for the inevitability of things going sideways, because then you have the right data set, hopefully, to then be able to make decisions in the moment that were nowhere in your plan. And so I was not in a senior leadership position at all. I was very much somebody in the line, but you're still from regimental commander down to a Ranger private. In order for that unit to function, you still have to have buy-in and competency and everyone doing their job to the best of their ability, regardless of the rank on their collar. And so I definitely had a lot of experience learning that in an environment where if you don't learn it quickly, then the retribution is pretty swift. So they will help you learn it very quickly. So that was a world that I lived in, when I was in the military.
Defense always before offense. And there's just like that analog comparison to the cyber world. There's many others. Now, sometimes I know that when we take an offensive approach and we have all circumstantial data that points to what we need to do, we can still make mistakes. Did you have any inexperiences like that in your life in the Army?
Yeah, very much so. Back in 2004, when we were deployed to the Afghan-Pakistan border, it was sort of an in-between phase in the war where the initial objective to eradicate the Taliban had more or less that had been accomplished. The Taliban was, a non-entity in Afghanistan at the time, but there was still this mission to find Osama bin Laden, which he had fled to Pakistan. We couldn't go into Pakistan. So we were sort of left at that time with, if you're going to do that, you would continue to deploy troops forward, hoping to run into him or run into somebody who knew where he was. And so that's what we were doing. We were doing raids and patrols in Kaus province. Depending on whose Garmin you were looking at, we were in Pakistan some days because that border is not super defined, but that's where we were. And one particular incident where essentially our platoon, which is about 35 guys, was asked to do two things simultaneously. And neither of them were mission critical. Neither of them were time sensitive. But because the order was given, at the objection of our platoon leader, who was the person on the ground, who was qualified to lead the platoon, had a lot of experience. He had to in order to be in that role. He gave alternatives to say, well, if you want to accomplish X, we can do that, but I don't have to split the platoon to do that. If I split the platoon can't talk to each other because the radios are line of sight. They're not going to work in the mountains. If I split the platoon, I split the combat power. Like there's just a lot of things where what I was talking about before, like you're already doing something that's risky. So you need to find ways to de-risk it whenever possible, and certainly not make decisions that makes it inherently your organization inherently more fragile. But he was overruled, and our platoon was split to do two different things. There was not a whole lot of happiness about that within the ranks. We all knew that this was kind of dumb, that what we were being asked to do, and the constraints of time that were being put around it. And so, kind of the long story short, our element of platoon, when we were passing through a very narrow canyon, we were ambushed, and we were lucky to make it, out of that particular kill zone. And as we came out of it, there is more muzzle flashes on the hillside, and it appeared that we were being fired at by an enemy force. And so, the leader we were on vehicles, the leader on our vehicle, he fired. And then three other of us, we also fired. We were the first vehicle coming out of the canyon. So, based on the information you have, you think, well, that's an enemy position. Clearly, if I don't fire, potentially, somebody pops up and shoots somebody behind me. And so, in a very short amount of time, matter of seconds, you make that decision. Come to find out, we knew all this the following day, was that those muzzle flashes and the folks that we saw, that was at dusk. We didn't have night vision because it wasn't quite dark enough for night vision, but the lighting conditions were poor. We'd been in a canyon shooting our weapons for 15 minutes. So, we couldn't hear anything. But in any case, the rounds that we fired at the very end of that ambush were on the other half of the platoon. And so we had 4 casualties, 2 KIA and 2 wounded, and all that was as a result of friendly fire, which is not, it's not certainly not common, but it's not uncommon. And it's certainly something that more often than not literally gets covered up within the military because um, it's not fun to talk about. And because usually when you have a friendly fire incident, it's not just the decision that a shooter or a pilot makes in the instant that is the problem, although that's part of it. It's also, well, why were they in that position in the first place, right? Like, why was the platoon split? Why couldn't they talk to each other? Why was the risk amplified? Was that necessary? And so it was certainly, a lesson in, and then we debriefed it, gave our statements. It was unequivocally, everybody knew it was friendly fire within 24 hours. There was no, cover up from our part at, and then we were back out, doing raids, shortly thereafter until we came home. But, that incident, on multiple levels offers a lot of lessons. Uh, and one of them is, at the very least, is just from a leadership standpoint, is it's really easy when we get scared or when we get insecure, and we just want to make things happen, because if that box is checked on my list, that will quell my anxiety, and I'll feel better that something's happening. Um, another saying, in at least in the world that I inhabited, was don't be in a hurry to die. Um, Especially in that context, fight or flight kicks in, and your job is not to, and this is true, and I think any leadership role, this is true if you're a parent, if you're a business leader, whatever role it is where you're exercising some leadership in a world that is uncertain and has risk. Um, Oftentimes your first instinct isn't necessarily the right one. It could be, but time is it's probably the most valuable resource any of us have. And even we see that in the financial markets. If I want to buy an option on Apple, the price of that option for 3 years is going to cost me a lot more money than the price for 3 days, because I have time. There's time for something to happen. So, part of the lesson there is, as a leader, number one, you have to trust the people you hired. And if they're telling you, if you're sitting not on the battlefield and somebody who is on the battlefield is saying, this is a really bad idea, you either need to listen to them, or if you're not going to listen to them, then you should probably fire them, because why are they there? Like, if they can't exercise the authority that they've been given, then that's the markings of some level of dysfunction. And that was unfortunately part of the failure of that day, was just a situation that was unnecessarily created, where the risk, was heightened. And then you have to live with, I mean, that's the reality too, is it's not to simply sit and blame, an officer who's in a talk someplace. You're the one there, right? You're the one who pulled the trigger. And so it's also just a lesson in, I mean, it's oversimplification to some degree, but it really is just a lesson in forgiveness. It's a lesson in the idea that, and that's a very severe, most people are not going to be in that situation. I'm not going to be in that situation, just living my life every day in the world right now when I'm not in the military. But it's definitely illustrated of the fact that, try as you might, things are in some order of magnitude, things will go wrong. And there's going to be a need to, in life, forgive yourself and forgive others. Because if you don't do that, and it doesn't mean that, forgiveness doesn't mean the thing didn't happen and you just pretend like it didn't. Forgiveness doesn't mean that there isn't remorse. Forgiveness doesn't mean that you don't need to apologize, or other people. It doesn't mean that doesn't need to occur. It absolutely does. But essentially, if you don't do that, then, another saying that certainly rings true in my life is, unforgiveness is like drinking the poison expecting it to hurt your enemy. And I think that's true from my own experience, right? I mean, I carried around a lot of guilt and a lot of shame, and a lot of just pure hatred for people who put us in that situation, because it even the objectives, that it wasn't like split the platoon because Osama bin Laden's over here and another terrorist is over here and you got to go get them. That's one thing, but that's not what this was. And so you look at that and you say, well, this was pointless. And what do we have to show for it? And so that's a process. That doesn't happen, overnight, in terms of healing from that. But there's been a lot of, just a lot of really great things that have happened in spite of that tragic event. I think maybe the other lesson too is allow yourself to be surprised. That when things like that happen, when the worst, whatever that is, your business fails, your marriage falls apart, the diagnosis comes through that you don't know what you're going to do with that. That isn't the end of the story, even though it feels like it. It feels like just the door has been clamped shut, and that's it. And the reality is, I don't think that's ever true. And I've experienced that, over the last 20 years. This last fall, I got to spend a few days with my former platoon mates. We had a reunion in Fort Lewis. The current members of our platoon, they hosted us, which was, man, if you want to feel old, like go back, 21-year-olds who are fired up and super fit and, ready to conquer the world. Really, really great guys. But then you sit with people that, if you would have told me even 5 years ago that I would be sitting and hanging out with some of these guys, just because there was so much um, pain and there was just so much weight that was associated with that event. It wasn't even so much that, we hated each other or something. It was just more like, man, like the thing we have in common is really not great. And I don't know if I want to revisit that. And maybe that wouldn't have been right 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but in the fullness of time, it was. Um, and so I guess is what I'm saying is that there's always hope, and there's always hardship. Hope is not a panacea that says things aren't going to be hard and you're not going to suffer or other people aren't going to suffer. You will. I mean, you just will. And that suffering takes many different forms. But there's definitely there's things to learn in the midst of that. There's growth opportunities in the midst of that, and I think that even parlays into our journey together at AdamNetworks, where if we were writing the story, we have this powerful technology and we have this great team. Well, this should have been immediately adopted by everybody 5 years ago, and we keep on. And it's like, that's not the story. And the story is much harder um, to kind of walk that path, but that's actually good, because the point isn't X number of dollars in ARR. The point isn't an exit at some valuation multiple. The point is to actually grow as humans, um, to have our character be developed and to serve others. And so all of the efficiencies that we are growing in and continuing to establish, and all of the growth that we are experiencing, that's great, but that's actually a byproduct. That's not the point. The point is the relationships within our team, and then the point is the relationships with the people that we get to serve. And if that's what we're focused on, and we work with good people that we trust, then a lot of these other problems, i.e., authoritarian leadership that makes dumb decisions that you have to try and live with, that becomes a lot less likely if you're actually listening to your team because you have a relational baseline that's positive. Then you're a lot less likely to find yourself in that scenario where bad things happen because we didn't listen. And that can still be true, but all of that is definitely, it's not a journey that I would choose. If I could, and even if I say all this today, I sound maybe more enlightened than I am. Um, on a podcast episode, I still struggle with it. Like there are still times where I think back at either that incident or just other things in my life of people who have hurt me or things that I'm not proud of. And there's still a temptation and opportunity to pick those things up again. And we just don't have to do that. But that also doesn't mean that to forgive, to learn, to move on, it doesn't mean that you don't have to make amends sometimes, because that's part of the process too, is acknowledging just the truth. And if you were part, even unwittingly, in harming someone else, you got to own that. And that's part of that person's healing, and that's part of yours, right? And so yeah, there's been a lot more learning opportunities than I necessarily volunteered for. But that's also kind of the way it goes, I think, in life too, is when you sign up for something big, however you define that, you start a business, you get married, you have kids, you join the military, um, you're never going to know what you're signing up for. I mean, think about it, like, you know, be deliberate, like, do all the things that you can to understand the choice that you're making. But at the end of the day, you really don't know how it's going to go until you're in the middle of it. And that's why that forgiveness and resilience piece is so important, because that's going to enable you to function in the midst of a world that is pretty messed up at times and doesn't work the way we want it to work. And increasingly, I view that that's a feature, not a bug. That's just, I don't get, if I walk into a situation that's dysfunctional, I think, 15 or 20 years ago, I would have spent a certain amount of time being like, can you believe it? Can you believe how this is operating? Can you believe that? Now I'm just like, I'm shocked when something works. Just because I understand how hard it is to make stuff work. I understand how fragile we are as human beings. And so there's a lot more compassion and a lot more patience that, and I have the scar tissue from my own impatience where I've been like, this has to work and this has to do that. And it's just like, look, it's just take a breath. It's okay. So that's been part of my journey, certainly, and kind of how the military has intersected with that.
Wow, no wonder you've brought so many defensive thought patterns to the company, and we're grateful for that. But one of the things that makes things very, very real for me is when real human lives are at stake, and that is why your story is so touching. And one of those casualties was Pat Tillman, and not that Pat has any more human value than someone who wasn't a public personality, but that must have brought on a whole new level of pressure that wouldn't have been the case if he was an unknown personality. But I mean, Pat was known not just in the U.S. as a football hero, but in Canada and the rest of the world that watches football. Would it have been significantly different if the casualties had not been a public personality at all?
You wouldn't even know about it. I mean, I know other people within that same world who have come to me over the years. They came to me privately and told me of, again, it's not common, but it happens. They've told me of friendly fire incidents that, as far as anybody knows, aren't, because it's it takes a lot um, of it just takes a lot for an organization to admit a mistake, and especially an organization like the Ranger Regiment, like, insert whatever, unit you want to, that is kind of has a persona to protect. And so, we're supposed to be superhuman and we all make mistakes. And again, that's a fragile mindset, because if that's your mindset as a human, as a CEO, as a CFO, as a whatever, it's like, all right, I'm prepared and I'm going to just nail it and I'm going to be perfect. You are going to be sorely disappointed and you're going to be very fragile. And you're not going to know how to deal with failure that will inevitably come, and disappointment that will inevitably come. So, yeah, I mean, it would have, we didn't know, like um, I knew Pat played in the NFL. I wasn't close with him. I saw him most days because his brother and I were in the same squad. So I worked very closely with Pat's brother, Kevin. And both of them were just great guys in the formation. They did their job, kept their mouth shut. They treated everyone with respect. And everyone in the platoon, to include the leadership, loved working with them. And so they didn't bring an ounce of any sort of prima donna mindset to their work. Um, so I was kind of, I mean, I just knew him as him, a guy that I work with. And then it wasn't until, I got back, when we all got back from Afghanistan. And then one of the guys in our platoon who he didn't deploy, I think he was at another school, but he had gotten us all copies of Sports Illustrated, and Pat was on the cover, and that was the first moment when I saw that. It was just like, huh, okay, because and it's a weird time too, because it was an in between time in the war, but it was also an in between time in terms of the internet. We didn't have social media. We didn't have um, the modalities of communication that we have today. You had the internet, so news was traveling, but it was still pretty analog. And so yeah, who he was prior to his job, prior to the army, definitely created kind of a firestorm of attention around the incident, which then just made, and that's the other kind of lesson from a leadership standpoint is, we gave statements and there was no question that it was friendly fire. I mean, our platoon sergeant walked the battalion commander through the site the following day and said, sir, it's friendly fire. So that was made abundantly clear. But then other leaders higher up the food chain, made the decision to spin a different narrative that they thought would be more palatable to the unit, to themselves potentially, and that's kind of the other, and that made it an even bigger thing than it would have been. Is now you have this idea of military cover-up, where the country is told on ESPN at a memorial service that he was killed by enemy fire, which I didn't watch that. I was in country, but once that lie unravels, then all sorts of other speculations and questions kind of get thrown into the mix. So that's kind of the other leadership lesson, is that good news does not get bad news, excuse me, does not get better with age. And so the more sensitive and the more negative a situation is, the more imperative it is that you are truthful. Imperative it is that you are transparent. And if there is something about the situation that you honestly don't know, I don't know is an acceptable answer. And that was, yeah, that was not handled well by a number of senior leaders within the Army and the Pentagon. And the people who paid the price for that were Pat's family primarily, and us to a lesser degree. But it's also just yeah, it's also just a function of, I think, a society looking for something to look up to. And then, it also becomes kind of a rumination on fame, on celebrity. And I think, today, Pat, um, he's a symbol, um, which I'm not necessarily opposed to that. It's just the danger of turning a human into a symbol is that you get to project upon that symbol whatever you want. And so pick a political issue, you have his name invoked on one side of the issue. If he was here, he would do and say this. And then you have his name invoked on another side of the issue. If he was here, he would do and say this. And at the end of the day, we don't know because he's not here. But that's tempting in a world where people are looking for meaning. They're looking for something to kind of hold on to. So yeah, it definitely made it a much more challenging, much more public sort of thing to walk through for sure.
I can't even imagine, Stephen, and I have so many thoughts and so many lessons out of that, and people can draw their own conclusions. And I know we're going to be benefiting from your experience for years to come. And thank you for writing a book on this. I will include it in the show notes. War Story, and our son Silas is a very proud owner of a signed copy when it first went to print, as am I. He was very excited to meet you. And yeah, thank you for what you've done for serving in the best way that you knew how to. And that's really a heritage that you and I have in common with our parents and grandparents and the ones that went before them, is that they really served the best way that they knew how. And that intent and that value system was successfully transferred to you. And for that, we are all benefactors. And those of you that are hearing or watching this and are seeing some of the characteristics that Stephen has just shared in our organization, now you have an idea of where they come from. We know that we can make mistakes, and we have all made plenty of them, but being truthful about them has been at the core of Stephen's voice anytime. Because when you're in cyber and you do make mistakes, or you make a claim that was true at the time you made it, but then later on becomes questionable, that is something that you have to address. And we're right in the middle of one of those right now. So the next 90 days, there's some really interesting things that are happening in cyber. And so your voice will be very important in this as well, Stephen. I'm not trying to be mysterious about anything. So, but it has to do with how internet traffic is being disguised as something other than what it is, in a way that many big tech organizations can't do anything about. It has to do with ad fraud. Oh my goodness, the story is so complex, but we're going to unravel it together, and we're going to be truthful about it 100% and present it from every angle. And so we actually delayed our recording because we're right in the middle of the weeds for that. So, Stephen, I really appreciate your time today. Is there any remaining piece of wisdom that you would really like our team or audience to hear from you?
I don't know. I think one thing I've been thinking about, AI is kind of dominating the conversation in all facets of life. And I think, long and short of it is we know that it's important. We know it's going to transform things, but we don't know how. And we're not going to know how any more than we knew how the internet was going to transform things in the year 2000. We knew it was big, we knew it was important, but how that was going to work itself out kind of remained to be seen. I don't know. It's more of an encouragement. I'm probably just talking to myself as much as I am anybody else. It's just an invitation to not be afraid. It's an invitation to focus on the work that each of us have been given to do, to be aware, to watch and learn and observe. But there's a lot of voices that are telling us, and even organizations that are basically saying, creating metrics on AI usage within their executive and leadership teams. If you're not using AI to whatever degree, then you can't get promoted. I think that's stupid. I'll just say that. But it comes from a good place that says this is a powerful tool. We want to use it. So I think the challenge for any of us in leadership, particularly in business, particularly in cyber, is to fight for that tactical pause, that moment where I'm getting a lot of information. I'm getting a lot of conflicting things that are telling me this is going to change everything, or it's, you don't have to worry about it. It's whatever. Or if you're not using it this way, then this business is going to die, or your business is going to die. All those voices are not helpful. And I think that's part of our challenge, part of my challenge, certainly in this age, is to find a place where I'm aware of what's going on. I'm not burying my head in the sand. If there are ways that AI can improve and amplify my work, by all means, let's use it. But I think we just have to operate from a place of curiosity and not from a place of fear, because that's not going to lead, even if you make the right decision and from a place of fear, which is unlikely, it's probably not going to lead to a good outcome. So I think that'll be a perpetual challenge for us for some time to come, because we're now in the age of AI.
Don't be in a hurry to die.
That's right.
Because it just might happen if you are too afraid. Then, oh my goodness, that is so ringing true for me. Thank you for your time today, Steven. Looking forward to our mission work together that we keep on executing on. So thank you for today.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I love it. It's always good to see you.
Likewise. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
The Defender's Log requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.